Hi everybody, I'm David Strauss with O'Kelly and Sorahan. We're a real estate closing firm here in the Atlanta metro area, and I run our Windward Parkway and Cumming offices, and I'm sitting here this morning with Yaz.
Yeah, awesome. So excited to have David, and we're just going to chat a little bit about the closing process and what that looks like. Tell me more about the
closing
your
process.
role. Yeah, exactly.
What we do as the closing attorney is make sure that the title is clear, and we help to prepare the documents for the closing, so you know how much money you have to bring as a buyer, how much money you're going to get as a seller, sort of the in-between piece between all the different parties. We reach out and talk to the lender if the buyer's getting a loan, talking to the listing agent, to the buyer's agent. We're problem solvers, so we help to make sure that anything that comes up, whether it's an issue with the loan side of things or with the title side, making sure that the seller can actually give the buyer a clear title to the property.
So you're representing what side?
Technically, if there's a loan, we represent the lender in the transaction, which just means that we technically don't provide legal advice to the buyer or the seller. We'll eat one side or the other, what they should do or how they navigate through that. But at the same time, we are attorneys, and so we can kind of explain how the contract works, what happens if you do this, what happens if you do that, and then without providing advice, sort of help the parties figure their way through things.
Yeah. What if somebody's paying cash?
If somebody pays cash, then we technically represent them, and we represent them in a limited capacity, which basically just means that we prepare the documents, issue the title insurance, and disperse the money, which just means paying things. So if there's a home warranty, we pay the home warranty. If the seller has a mortgage, we pay off their mortgage. That's what our role is in a cash transaction.
Okay. How important is the title search and title insurance?
All those things,
all those things,
and what are those things too, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, there's so much stuff to know as a first-time home buyer, and title actually I think is one of those words that's a little bit confusing.
Yeah.
Because we use it to mean 3 or 4 different things in a real estate transaction. Title, a lot of times people think that means the deed, because on a car, title is what gives you ownership. Title in real estate really means the history of all of the documents that relate to the property. So it could be the deed, which the seller gives the buyer and makes them the owner. The deed is the document that actually makes you the owner of the property and transfers the property from one person to another. There's the deed from the seller to the buyer. If the buyer's getting a loan, they give what's called a security deed, which is the mortgage, a lien against the property in favor of the lender. The title is all of those things, and when we say we're clearing title, we're making sure that when the seller gives the deed to the buyer, that anything else that was on there, like the seller's mortgage, the security deed is paid off and released, and so the buyer owns the property free and clear.
Sweet.
A lot of times first-time home buyers, it can be overwhelming, all the different things.
Yeah.
So my advice with a first-time home buyer is work with Yaz. No, but seriously, it's so important to have good partners because there's just so many different moving parts to a real estate closing. And working with a good real estate agent, that's really the key because they're going to help to plug you in with all of the people that you need to get the transaction closed on time.
Yeah.
And if you're a first-time home buyer without that resource, you can be lost in the woods.
100%. And then title insurance.
Yes. Okay. So title insurance, that's one of the other biggest things that we do as the closing attorneys. There's usually 2 title insurances in a transaction. If you're a buyer and you're getting a loan, most of those first-time home buyers you're going to have to buy title insurance for the lender. Title insurance for a lender basically is an insurance that says that if the lender had to foreclose on you, that they would get paid back first out of the transaction.
Yeah.
It just tells the lender, hey, you're making a good loan on the property. There's clear title for you to make the loan. It doesn't protect the buyer at all. And the buyer has to buy that for the lender because they're giving them the money and they say so.
What's the typical cost of that?
It varies. So it's tiered. The bigger the loan is, the more it goes up. But it's usually about $1.75 per $1,000 of loan amount.
One-time payment, right?
One-time payment, yes.
At closing.
At closing,
done.
That's it, done.
Forever till you hold the property.
Forever till you hold the property, yes. And then in addition to the lender's title insurance, there's also an optional insurance, which is called owner's title insurance. You don't have to buy that. We would strongly recommend always that you do because it insures between 33 and 35 different things, just depending on the policy. It not only says, sometimes people are like, oh, it's if, the long-lost grandma comes forward and says that she owns the property. It does cover that, but it also covers a whole bunch of other things. One of the biggest things that it does is it protects you against fraud. So if somebody were to try and impersonate you and sell the property, which unfortunately is something that actually happens.
Yeah,
huge.
And it's so tricky. Now they're recording voices that sound like people, like your family members.
Yeah, fake IDs. I mean, with AI, generative AI.
Wild.
Once a month we usually thwart somebody trying to pretend they're someone else. So it's the title insurance, if that were to happen to you, would protect you. They would get you the property back, or if they couldn't, they would pay you the value of the property. So
have you had an incident where something comes up in the title before you close on the property.
Oh,
And
yeah.
like how did that get kind of solved?
Yeah, that's the other really good thing about having the title insurance is that we do have stuff come up on title pretty often, but a lot of times it's sort of minor stuff.
Okay.
Like you sell me your house and the closing attorney pays off your mortgage, and now it's 5 or 6 years later, I'm going to sell the house. Attorney comes back and tells me, hey, we see that there's actually a mortgage from a previous owner on the property and it's yours.
Yeah.
And your mortgage definitely got paid off. We closed, we saw the attorney paid the money, but your bank never filed the paperwork to release it. If you have, and that happens all the time. If you have if I have title insurance, we just go ahead and close because there's an agreement between the title insurance companies about that. Yeah, exactly. But if you don't have title insurance, then we have to actually go about fixing it. We'll get it done, but it just might take 3 or 4 months, right, for the lender to actually release that.
And you can do that. You have to wait for that
You'd
before
have
closing.
it depends. Like sometimes we can get it done faster than that. But sometimes the title insurance company might say, no, that needs to actually get released before we can close.
So they would have to, the closing would be pushed back 3 to 4 months.
It,
like worst case scenario,
worst case scenario.
Depending, of course.
Yes, yeah. But most of the time, those little title problems we can get fixed and cleared up. Every now and again, we get some crazy thing.
And it's not typical.
Not typical, but it does happen, out there. And sometimes it's just, there are mistakes, like people just, like something got signed and never got recorded, so it looks like there's a title problem, and then we just reach out to the prior law firm and they have the document and it solves the problem. It just depends, we do so many transactions that we see all sorts of wild stuff. Yeah.
It's real estate. I feel like in real estate, there's just not one thing that's the same. It's like always something different.
Always something different. Yeah. It's always what I tell people when we get new employees. I'm like, we do the same thing every day, but it's somehow never exactly the same. It's always different.
That's a good one.
Yeah, so it's got some wrinkle.
And then what about earnest money? Because when buyers go into contract, they have the earnest money, and then sometimes they send it to the either closing attorney or the broker's office. Yeah. But let's say if they do send it to the closing attorney, what is escrow? If the deal falls through, what happens to the earnest money?
Yeah, that's one of the other big reasons to work with a good real estate agent because. What earnest money is basically it's money that you give to say to the seller, hey, I'm serious about buying this property. If your agent negotiates it, you can have a period of time in the contract where if you decide you don't like the house, you can just get your earnest, terminate the contract, get your earnest money back and go find something else to buy.
Yeah, if you're within that due diligence period, of course.
Correct. So you have to have a good agent who can negotiate for it.
Yeah, if you're not in the due diligence period, then
exactly.
There's a couple other things, but that is the safest.
Yeah, exactly. And there's also sometimes we have a financing contingency where
exactly appraisal contingency.
All those
things.
But
those are kind of dependent on other things,
right.
Like where the buyer's in control is within that due diligence period,
right? Where
they can say hey, for whatever reason, at least in the state of Georgia, you don't have to have a reason to back out.
Correct.
But should you decide to, you can keep your earnest money.
Yep.
But if you don't,
then
you lose all contingencies.
Yeah. Exactly. You might lose the earnest money. Like we just actually had this come up pretty recently. The parties were past the due diligence period. There was some rain. The buyer thought that there was some water coming into the property, and so they decided that they didn't really want to move forward anymore. Yeah. And so then it was they sent a termination, and then it was a question of, well, do they get the earnest money back? And unfortunately, because they were outside of that due diligence period, it becomes a dispute between the parties as to who should get it back, and that's never a good thing. I will tell you that. It can get complicated there. Basically, again, working with somebody like yourself is really important because even sometimes you'd be surprised agents just miss the due diligence period. That also happened recently. They thought it ended on Tuesday night, and it actually ended on Monday night. And so when they sent over the termination, they were outside of their due diligence period, and that was it. They lost the earnest money. It's no good.
No good, absolutely not.
And one of the biggest things that an agent can help you to do is make sure you protect your earnest money.
Yeah, for sure.
And
then if it goes to the escrow account, or you send it to the closing attorney or wire it, which is important for. Not to do it through email, right?
Yes, yeah. Wiring instructions for sure. Always you want to verify those. So let me actually back up one step. So the earnest money, like you said, it could be held either by the attorney or by one of the brokers. And basically you pay it to them and then they hold it in this account until it's time to disperse it. And that's either once the transaction closes or if there's an agreement on the parties to return it. So you terminate during due diligence and then the seller and you both sign something saying, the buyer gets it back.
Yeah.
if it, for some reason, like in that one where the buyer terminated after the due diligence period, then that's where it's important as to who's holding it, because whoever does have the earnest money is the one who decides who gets it back. Ooh. Yeah, so if you're the buyer and you agree to let the seller's broker hold the earnest money, they're supposed to call it down the line, but of course,
the broker is going to have a little bit of
a bias,
exactly.
Probably. Yeah. So, having the attorney hold it could be a good way to go, or trying to have your broker hold it is always good too.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Sweet. And then closing costs, like I know it can vary as well, but what's like a typical percentage? What could first-time home buyers expect, or any buyer in general?
So if you're buying in cash, which first-time home buyers, maybe you've got mom or dad who can help. But 1% for a cash buyer is a safe estimate of purchase price. Okay. If you're getting a loan, then between 3 to 6% of the loan amount is what you can bet for the closing costs, and that's going to include the title side stuff and also the lender side stuff. And so it varies so much because, depending on your credit score, the lender you're working with, maybe more or fewer fees from the lender side of things. Yeah. But for the title side of things, you can always assume 1% of purchase price is a safe bet.
3 to 6 for the loan. If there's loan involved.
And that's because there's some additional costs. Like you'll have to set up an escrow account typically, which is where the lender's going to hold some money for you to pay your taxes and insurance every year. Yeah. And that goes towards your closing costs as well. So. Okay. Tax, there's a bunch of different things on a loan. Intangible tax, which is a tax to record the mortgage, and that's like $1,500 or $1,600 on most mortgages. So, okay. Yeah.
Now, final walkthrough.
Yes.
If something happens in a final walkthrough, has it happened before?
Oh yeah. If I could tell you a million walkthrough stories.
Yeah. So I know typically you can ask the seller to hold the X amount of money.
Sure. You're talking about holding money in escrow. That definitely could be a solution.
Yeah, or let's say we're doing a final walkthrough and the property is supposed to be in a certain condition and it's not. After due diligence, repairs have been done, X, Y, and Z, just something unexpected. Yeah. So what then?
So you hit on actually an important thing, which is walkthrough. A lot of people, you'd be really surprised, they don't do a walkthrough. So you be sitting at the closing table and you're talking to them and it just comes up in conversation of, did you go by the property this morning? And they're like, no. Oh, did you go yesterday? Nope. They just buy it without having gone and done a walkthrough. And
it's so important because you need to make sure you're buying the property in the condition you agreed to, yes. or that the repairs are made, right?
Right. Yep. Exactly. I can give you a good example. Yeah. This was maybe 3 or 4 years ago. Yeah. The buyer had gotten You want to do a walkthrough before closing and as close to the closing as possible without being late, please.
Same day is best, I'd say for sure, but not being late, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Because what happened, so these buyers had done a walkthrough the day before, like they went in the morning and walked through. The sellers were pretty much out of the property. They were like, okay, everything looks good. Yeah. Well, the sellers had dogs. And they couldn't take the dogs with them to the hotel they were staying at that night. So they left the dogs in the house, and we had a big thunderstorm that night. And the dogs, got super freaked out. It was like a $1.2 million property, and they ate the molding all along the baseboards of the wall. Totally damaged it. But the buyers, good for them, they did go stop by the property on the way to the closing, and so they were able to see that. And then the solution there, because the seller didn't really want to fix it, which is crazy, because things happen, but you got to make it right. They didn't want to fix it, and so the buyer just said, well, we're not going to close because the property is not in the condition it's supposed to be. And then the sellers pretty quickly agreed to fix it. So
the buyers were willing to be like, no, we're not closing.
Yeah, and that's why you want to do the walkthrough beforehand, because had the buyers not, the seller would have been responsible to fix that.
Of course.
But the buyer would have had to go chase them down in court or something, and it's a big hassle and becomes a big headache. Whereas if the buyer just says, well, I'm not going to close, that seller probably needs to sell the property to go buy their next one, and so it really puts the pressure on them to do the right thing, and they ultimately did on that one. So that's
great.
Good.
So and then the seller could just write a little check for it or whatever.
Yeah, there's a bunch of different ways to handle it. They could give a closing cost credit to the buyer. We have to then go back to the lender for that, because anytime money goes between the seller and the buyer, it should be on the settlement statement. Sure. Or what we could do is just the parties figure out a vendor who's going to fix the problem, and then the seller just writes a check to that person, and then we don't really have to go back to the lender because it's on the seller side.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's always a solution.
Yeah, love it. Solution
right.
oriented.
Yes,
there's
that's right.
There's always a way. You just gotta think outside the box.
That's right. Yep,
yeah.
absolutely.
Okay, cool. Now, if your best friends were buying a house, first-time home buyers, what advice would you have for them?
First-time home buyers. So again, I think, and I really do mean this, like work with somebody like you who knows what they're talking about and is knowledgeable about how everything works.
Yeah.
Because you need somebody who's going to kind of shepherd you through the process.
Yeah.
And then, good partners. So if you're getting a loan, get a good lender. And I would interview a couple of people as well. The title side of things, lenders will tell you too, like who they prefer, and same thing for agents. But it's really important for the buyer to interview their lender because they're really going to have the closest relationship. Mm-hmm. And I would also tell my friends if they were buying a house for the first time, a lot of lenders offer something now called pre-underwriting. It's always seemed backwards to me. I don't know if you always thought this too. Like most things you figure out if you can buy it and then you go buy it.
Yep.
But with a house you go buy it and then figure out if you could buy it.
Yep.
Right? And that's why we have that financing contingency. It's in case you don't qualify for the loan. Yep. But a lot of lenders now after COVID have basically switched the way they do things. Mm-hmm. And so you can apply for a loan with a lender. Mm-hmm. They can fully, what they call underwrite you, basically figure out if you qualify for the loan before you even go look for property. Yep. And that's good for you because you know that they can buy the house. It's good for the buyer because they know how much house they can buy, so they don't waste time looking at stuff that they're not going to be able to afford. Mm-hmm. And then they don't have to worry about like if they get under contract losing their earnest money because they ended up not qualifying for the loan.
Exactly. Yeah,
and it also makes your offer more attractive because you can tell a seller, hey, we are getting a loan, but we can close in like a week or 2 weeks. Whereas if you have to do the whole loan process after you go under contract, you're like 30 days probably. So yeah,
it's a good one.
Yes, pre-underwrite. That's the way to go.
Any other tips?
Just making sure you have all your documents in order too, like for applying for the loan, so that way when the lender's asking you for all the stuff, all the information they need, you have it available to them. And then I would also say read the contract before you sign it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That seems like a common sense thing. Get people all the time, like they'll say, hey, can you take a look at this amendment? And you read it and you go, yeah, I don't know if I would sign that. You might want to change this over here. And they go, oh, well, we already signed it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So if you have a question about something, ask before you put your signature on it because you can always go back and negotiate. But once you sign it, a lot harder.
It's going to be harder. Yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely. So. Did we miss anything? I feel like we covered closing costs, like percentage, title, insurance, escrow, like earnest money.
The only other thing I think sometimes people ask about when they're buying a home for the first time with the title is surveys. So in Georgia, like you come from Florida, they require a survey on every property, every resale. Yeah. We don't in Georgia, and part of the reason for that is that the title insurance actually has coverage for survey matters. Okay. What that means is like if you move in your house and then you get a survey down the road, we had one last year. They up in Dawsonville, they bought the house in I think like May or something. They went to put a pool in over the summer, and when they surveyed for the pool, they found out their house was a foot over the property line into the public right of way.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so like in the road basically. Yeah. Oh. And they freaked out, but the title insurance had them covered, and so they got the county to give them the road, so they made it a private road. They got an easement for the guy who lived down the road. The title insurance company paid the guy down the road to sign the easement. They did all the paperwork. And so, boom, they fixed the title problem like that. And now, had the buyers done a survey ahead of time, they would have seen that, but they would have had to take care of it or not had coverage for it under the title insurance.
Which is why it's important to also have title insurance.
Yeah,
another
exactly.
reason, like that's a great example.
Yeah, for sure. And because people ask, like, should I get a survey or not? I'm usually say no. I mean, it depends. If you're buying some land and you're not in a subdivision, you might want to get a survey. Sure. But if you're in a platted subdivision, platted just means where they've already drawn all the lots on a big map. Yeah. You probably don't need one. And even to put in a fence, a lot of times they can just do that with the plat. You don't need an actual lot survey. And they're expensive. Save some cost,
For sure. Anywhere you can, right?
Yes, absolutely.
As it is, it's going to be expensive.
Yes,
So.
Hopefully rates will come down soon and it'll make it a little more
Never
affordable.
know.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, awesome. I think that's all. Anything else?
No, I don't think so. I think we covered it all. Yeah.
Thank you so much. It was so great chatting
and sharing
chatting
with
tips
you.
with first-time home buyers, anybody else that can take away anything. So
absolutely,
it's exciting.
And of course, if any of your viewers have questions, they're always welcome to give me a call, and we're happy to help.
Yeah, absolutely. Yay!
Awesome.
So good.
Yay! High five.